So in the UK, 61% of people are not either disengaged or not actively engaged with their jobs. And we think that's a horrible statistic, because what that means is 20 million people out of 30 million that work in the UK view their jobs fundamentally as a transaction. So they'll walk into the office or the place of work in the morning, they'll spend between 6 and 12 hours there, and they won't necessarily invest themselves fully in the job. They won't necessarily abide by the mission statement of the company, if it has one, and we'll get to that later as well. They won't self-improve quite as much. They don't necessarily have a friend at the office, and hence they're not invested in actually what they're doing. And we think that's terrible for a couple of reasons. One, personally it's terrible. Why would you ever want to spend between 6 and 12 hours at a place where you view as a transaction, not as something that you're really passionate about doing? And two is we think that the fact that the UK, for example, has the lowest productivity of any G7 nation bar Japan is intrinsically linked to this. If you're not truly engaged with your job, then how is it that you can actually be extremely productive? And it's not actually just a UK problem. This is a problem across the world, and in particular in Western European markets and North American markets, which are the very specific countries that have the lowest productivity levels and lowering productivity levels over time. So we think we're well positioned to try and tackle that problem. It's a problem that's, of course, much, much bigger than us right now. But it's a problem that's all over the world, and we're trying to solve it. However, if we want to solve the problems of the world, of course, we need to be able to engage with our own employees. And we've gone, like I said, from 50 people to 180, and this year from 100 people in January to 180 now. At the beginning of the year, and for large parts of last year, we didn't really have a management team. It was a bunch of 23-year-old kids not knowing what they were doing it really well, but not actually knowing what they were doing. And we understood that given the growth that we were experiencing, we needed to bring in a layer of management from the outside and some promotion from the inside as well. And we did that kind of beginning of the year. So in that range of 100 people to 180 this year, 40 of those people came in between January and February. Okay, first lesson, don't do that. Very, very difficult to do. And the reason it's difficult to do is because it takes so much longer for a management team to gel. And if that management team doesn't gel very, very well, then in reality you have frustration in the organization and people leave. It's fundamentally important to have get three things right. One is you have to have a clear mission. Because if you want to build a great company, there is no great company that isn't trying to solve a real problem. Two is you have to understand what the values of your organization are. And this is not just something you post on a wall and forget about. You have to understand actually what makes your company special to work for. Why is it that people really want to be there? What are you trying to solve? Because the problem with scaling up very quickly is very simple from the perspective of a C-level person. You suddenly don't know everybody. And that's the long and the short of it. Like 2 years ago, I knew everybody by first name, and I knew everybody's problems, and they'd be very forthright with me if there was an issue. Today, I'll walk into the office and I'll say, how you doing? And nobody will say, oh, I've had a crap day. No, they'll say, oh, it's fantastic. Nobody will say, no, I'm struggling. And as you come to terms with that, you realize you need to be able to select people who live in accordance with certain values, because you can no longer police it. You can't, and that's the fundamental thing you have to get right. And that's very much about self-selection and self-policing. So it's really important during the recruitment process and during the first months of somebody's experience with you to make sure that they are people who live by those values. So our mission statement is to build a better society, one relationship at a time. We're very passionate about building a better society in particular, because our service primarily, the reason we got into this market is to democratize benefits, because small companies have traditionally not been, had the possibility to have benefits of this kind, and because we want to level the playing field. We want to make an SME able to compete, theoretically, with a Google for benefits. Why is it that a great tech company has fantastic benefits and you hear about the culture, but smaller companies have difficulty competing with that? Your values aren't set by the C-suite. Your values are set by your people, whether you like it or not. Every person that comes in brings and adds something to those values, and you have to distill it into something that makes sense and is coherent. So our values are, it's not a job, it's a family. Try it, test it, get it done. go above and beyond, work hard, play harder, we don't know it's impossible. And the last one, which is a C-suite one that we imposed, is zero fear. And I'll talk to you about that for a second. Again, if you don't do this before you embark on rapid headcount growth, then you'll never get people to buy into what you're actually trying to do. Because when people come in, they'll bring their own experience, which is great, but it's different from yours, and it's different from what you want your experience to be. And it's important to create the mindset of, this is what we're trying to protect, and this is what we really value, and this is what we're truly about. Because people then have to either self-select in and stay for a long time and further those, or self-select out. Many people you'll find, when you grow rapidly, self-select out. And that's it. If you've set the stage with the mission and values, that's fine. If you hadn't, like we hadn't entirely, you end up bringing people in and then losing them when you didn't want to lose them necessarily. Or you end up bringing people in, and the truth is you hadn't quite thought about whether they fit into what you're trying to do. Zero fear is the sixth value that we actually, is the one that we didn't come up with democratically. This was very much kind of a decision that we made at the C-level. And this is again about the fact that when you grow very quickly, as a CEO, as a chief operating officer, as an FD, you no longer know your people well, and you understand that people won't necessarily tell you the whole truth and nothing but the truth, or they will, but they'll kind of color it a little bit. It's all okay. It's going really well. Things are awesome. And if you just sit down in your office and don't go and talk to people, that's the feedback you'll get until suddenly something goes wrong. So zero fear is actually the most important of these values, and zero fear is the concept of we can tell each other like it is. We can tell each other things like they are. And if you don't establish that immediately, it's really, really difficult to get there. And that's fundamental to do before you embark on hiring senior management, because this is, it's difficult to do. It sounds really easy, but to have a culture of zero fear where the last person in who's an intern can speak to the CEO with a tone of voice and state exactly what's on their mind, that takes a cultural shift. For many people who come from perhaps larger organizations into startup, it's pretty crazy. So you can have a great hiring process, you can have a great probation process, induction process, but if you don't establish that first, none of that's going to help you. Or better, it will, but all of that will be much more difficult than if you start immediately with mission, values, objectives, and tying those down.